Chapter -2, An Old Legend in Reverse. Cass did not have much of a plan yet. She was hoping inspiration would strike. She figured if she could make the soldiers turn around, she could slip between them and untie the bandits. But that was as far as she'd gotten in her thinking. Unfortunately, she couldn't find a stick long enough to poke a soldier in a safe distance. All the available wood in the area had been burned in the campfire. She looked for low-hanging branches she might break off, but these two were missing. "Are you sure you want to make these people your prisoners?" she heard the jester asking the soldiers. "Will you not then be as bad as the bandits yourselves?" "No, you will be worse. 'Tis true they steal from the rich, but do not the rich first steal from the poor?" For some reason, Cass didn't have much faith in the jester's logic would convince the soldiers, or even that if the logic convinced them, they would necessarily follow his suggestions. A more practical solution was required. "How much gold have you, or you, the jester continued. "Has not the king taken from your parents? What should be theirs is yours. If it is he who is the master thief, the royal bandit on his head does not make him any less a royalty bandit. That's it. Begone, beast. Thank you for allowing me to keep my feet." The regal beagles, it seemed, had decided to release the jester from the canine captivity. However, from the sound of the barking, bow-wowing, yipping, Cass feared that the reason they were moving on was that they'd picked up another scent, hers. Sure enough, the yapping got louder and louder. Within less than a minute, Cass saw the dogs heading towards her. The soldiers, she knew, would be close behind. She had the advantage of invisibility, but that went only so far with creatures whose olfactory organs were 40 times more sensitive than a human's. Then quickly, she pulled off her sweater and threw it left in the direction of the boulder. Meanwhile, she stepped quietly in the opposite direction. The ruse worked. The beagles piled onto the sweater, pawing fiercely at the mysterious garment. Looking for Cass, when she didn't appear, they growled in frustration and ran circles around the boulder. Afraid to break into a run, lest to attract their attention, Cass edged slowly away from the dogs. She was on the verge of escape when the dogs suddenly lost interest in the boulder and started sniffing around again. Quickly, she unbuckled her belt and tossed it into the brush. Again, the beagles drove, again their quarry, scrambling to get her belt. Again, they were frustrated to find Cass gone, and the belt no longer attracted to her waist. Again, they sniffed. Cass, meanwhile, wet her fingers to see which way the wind was blowing. Seething, she crept in an upward direction, hoping that way would hide her scent. At last, she miscalculated. The beagles followed, not airborne, but the ground-borne scent that they started running towards her anyways. Increasingly nervous, Cass bent down to untie her shoes. The garments continued. This game continued, although to Cass, obviously, it wasn't a game. Cass tossed the left shoe to the right and her right shoe to the left, and to her right sock to the left and her left sock to the right, until she was standing barefoot and shivering behind a tree. What to do next? She succeeded in confusing the dogs enough that they were now fighting over the socks and about 30 feet away from her. But they would decipher for only so long, and the soldiers no doubt would be fast behind. Cass hesitated. She might be invisible, but she currently didn't relish in the idea of undressing any further. Hey, a particular sorting, wheezing, laughing sound startled her, like a pig imitating a hyena, or maybe vice versa. Hey. Cass reeled around to find the homologist watching her from the top of a rock. Mr. Cabbage Face, she whispered excitedly. Why do you keep calling me that? My master's housekeeper sometimes called me her little cabbage face, but I thought it was because she always gave me her leftover cabbage. No, it's because there's no time to explain. How long have you been here? The homologist struggled his little shoulders a while. Why didn't you say anything? Too fun to watch you hopping around, said the homologist, smirking. Cass noticed that his beak was improved remarkably, now that he had no longer been being teased, but rather the one doing the teasing. Funny, what are you doing here? Right now? Looking for food, but those cheap bandits don't have any meat, only rotting potatoes. He held up a moldy potato, a worm peeking out of the side. Gross, said Cass, stepping away. They eat like peasants, said the homologist, throwing the potato to the ground disgusted. The worm he kept and plopped it into his mouth. Not bad. I think that's so that they can afford to feed the real peasants, said Cass, trying to ignore the end of the worm wiggling between his lips. I came here to warn you. Lord Pharaoh is looking for you. Why? The homologist furrowed his brow. Something about a secret that will make him live forever. You know the only person who can show it to him, or the only person who can keep him from it. One or the other, I forget. I saw it all through the eyeglass of yours. You mean he knows about the secret? Cass asked excitedly. Although they warned Lord Pharaoh was ominous, it wasn't also the first clue to uncovering the secret. She encouraged since entering the Jester's world. I don't know how about any secret. All I know is he's a very scary man, and if he finds you, I'll offer this advice. His weakness is vanity. Show him a mirror and you will gain a minute. A mirror? Oh. Well, it was owning to Cass or to the potato or cabbage face himself. The dogs were back on Cass's trail, yipping wildly. Oh, don't worry about those blasted beagles, said the homologist, dismissive. I can get rid of them. Cass looked at him suspiciously. You're not planning on eating them, are you? The homologist grinned. Now there's an idea, Mr. Cabbage Face. Actually, beagles taste terrible. Very gamey. Come here. I want to show you something before I go. There's no time. Look, the homologist hopped off the rock and onto the bed of leaves and pine needles, brushing them aside to reveal a large burlap trap. He lifted the corner of the silver candlestick pocket out, and then he pulled the trap off altogether. Underneath the wooden chest the bandits had stolen from the procession, Cass recognized the big brass lock. Half open and filled with the brim with gold and jewels, the chest was a veritable treasure trove. It glistened and glittered and gleamed and beckoned to be only treasure can. For you, he hesitated, and not being very experienced with gift-giving, nobody ever did anything nice for me before. Well, thanks, but this treasure isn't really yours to give, Mr. Cabbage Face, Cass scolded. Besides, my job now is to free those bandits, and if I offer this stuff to the soldiers, they'll just take it and won't free anybody. The homologist didn't have time to respond. The beagles were fast descending on them. Quick to hide under the trap, he whispered, I'll get them out of here. But you can't run fast enough, they'll catch you. Who said anything about running? Cass drove into the pile of treasure, and the homologist threw the trap over her. Then, recovering the trap with leaves, he headed towards the dogs and let out a shrill whistle. Beagles, you greedy dogs. You're no better than hogs. Catch me if you can. The homologist made a gesture with his hand, and Cass watched through the hole of the trap. Didn't recognize but assumed that very rude, and he scrambled up near the tree. Barking angrily, the dogs pawed and scratched at the base of the tree trunk till the homologist climbed out onto a long branch and dropped over the edge, catching the branch with one hand. Watch this, he shouted, and then he swung himself through the air and catching the next one of the trees like monkeys. Ha ha! He swung from one tree to the next. A fierce of eagles gave chase. The ground of soldiers appeared over the rise. Cass briefly panicked, but then they too started running after the Mulges. She was alone once more. "Bye-bye, Mr. Cabbageface," she said softly. She doubted she would ever see him again, whether in the past or the future or some other time zone is yet unknown. Cass waited 5 minutes before peeling the tarp off of her head and examining the bandits' horde. Never one to be overly interested in jewels, she couldn't help but be impressed and wonder what would happen if she were to take a piece or two back with her to her own time. Everything here must be worth a fortune, she thought. Then again, she didn't know how to get herself back to her own time, let alone how to bring a tiara along for the ride. Oh well, if I ever were a tiara type, she would be more dedicated. Really wasn't. She'd never gone through the whole princess phase, as many girls go through. She was feeling her own pointy ears just prevent her from wearing tiaras anyways. Just as she was about to tear herself away the glittering mound, she noticed the black rock on which the gator so many coins and rings and even the blade of a sword. The lodestone, she guessed. The same rock she'd seen during the bandits' raid of the Duke's possession. Although without the double monocle, it looked lean and did not flourish glow. The sword, she thought, was a bit fancy for cutting rope, but the bejeweled gold handled the elaborate engraving on both sides of the blade and would be serviceable nonetheless. She looked through and strengthened to pull the sword from the stone, just like King Arthur, she thought, holding the sword aloft. She laughed at herself and started lowering the sword, and stopped with a still in midair. The idea struck her. A crazy, far-fetched idea. The idea that had little chance of success. But it was one thing going for it. It was the only idea she had. How to communicate to the jester was the question. Only the blade and the sword. She peered as many bits of metal off the lodestone as she could, and then she started reacting her steps back towards the campsite. When she got close, she proceeded more cautiously, careful not to break any twigs or send any rocks tumbling into the campsite. She hid the sword behind the tree, and the lodestone she continued to hold in her hand just like a precious object it was. By now, the jester's feet were bound together to prevent him from running, but remarkably his hands and mouth had been left alone. It seemed the soldiers enjoyed his stories. They were demanding him to tell another. "But I know no more," he protested, "and the jester, you have heard them all. And then we shall gag you like the others," threatened the commander, ripping a long strip of piece of fabric in preparation. Wait, I think I have something. Let me see. Have I told you the one about the sea serpent and the maiden?" "Yes," shouted a sailor chorus. Nobody saw the lodestone rolling on the ground, seemingly in its own voiration, or they didn't believe their eyes if they did. And Cass, kicking the rock along like a soccer ball, was able to reach the jester without difficulty. When she tapped him on the shoulder, however, he jumped and everybody noticed. "You are a bit squeamish fellow, aren't you?" teased the commander. "Are there ants in your pants, or did you move a mouse follow you from the dungeon?" "No, I don't. I did, you know. The most annoying mouse, indeed." "How?" said the jester, although through gritted teeth he was trying viciously not to squirm, despite the fact that Cass was pressing the lodestone back down into his back, where it wouldn't be visible to the soldiers. She waited a moment, whispered her instruction. When she finished, the jester bowed formally to the commander. "Sir, I have a thought of another story after all, and it is the most important one benefiting the glorious occasion. Indeed, it may change your mind in this very situation in which we find ourselves. You may even find yourself moving to free us all." "I seriously doubt that," said the commander. "Well, wait and see. There is a legend I am sure you know about the sword and the stone. He who pulls the sword from the stone is the one true king." We have all heard the legend, yes. What's your point?" "My point, like the point of the sword." "Are you punning soldiers as well as the cunning ones?" "A pun? Oh yes. You see, you are not the only ones is clever in the tongue," said the commander. He puffed himself up, and obvious that he had not intended that pun, but because he was the commander, nobody argued with him. "My point is that there are more to the legend than you might think. A second point to the sword, so you speak." Then the jester, "If the sword is called back to the stone, he who can call himself king is not the true king, but a false one. We owed him no allegiance." "What has this to do with us?" "I see no sword here, nor any stone." The jester reached behind his back and presented a black and gold lodestone in dramatic flourish. "Here is the fabled stone in which I allure," he said aloud, lowering it to the ground, "and when I raise my arms, the swords fly through the air, and sticks and stones, and will you renounce your false king and let the bandits go?" The commander laughed. "Very well. There is little risk of that. But I know that your head will join the Anastasia's on the platter if no flying swords appear. Consider me warned." The jester looked up to the sky and closed his eyes and solemnly pronounced, "Excalibur, sword of swords, be the king to be the false one, fly to this rock now." The commander tapped his toes impatiently until one of the soldiers pointed. The bejeweled sword had emerged from behind the tree and sailed through the air. Everybody was gagging, bandits included, watched with astonishment as the sword slowly, briefly hovered for a falcon searching for its prey. Then, flashing in the sunlight, it lurched forward and flew straight towards the jester, as if answering his silent call. The lodestone sparkled at his feet, and when the sword reached the stone, it paused in midair, then drove point first and landing in midair of the stone and stood slightly, perfectly balanced, seemingly weightless, a miraculous sight. A surprised murmur ripped through the crowd, and even the bandits opened their eyes wide, seeming to forget the moment of their captive condition. One by one the soldiers dropped to the ground, kneeling before the sword as if the sword itself were a king. Eventually only the commander was left standing. Then he too was overcome. "The sword knows all," he said, and the jester's eyes glistened. "I renounce the king, and you are all free." "Oh, now," the jester grinned in delight. "There's no need for such drama. It is I who am supposed to put on a show here." He looked over at Anastasia and winked. Cass, now standing behind the jester, thought she saw Anastasia offer a reluctant smile in return. I'm going to get out of the way," Cass whispered in the jester's ear. "After the soldiers disappear and gone, come find me over where we slept. I have to tell you something. It's really important." As she walked away, she tried to ignore the tired and faint-headed feeling that had been slowly overtaking her all morning.